Okay. I think we're recording. Shelby, I think we're good to go.
Good.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for jumping on tonight. Again, thank you so much for joining this conversation tonight. I first like to introduce myself. My name is Mark Solano, and I like to consider myself a friend and advocate for the animals. And on top of that, I'm sure Shelby knows this, I'm also what you call a foster failure. So I'm going to try to do my best to make sure you don't hear both of my dogs tonight. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking the time to join us this evening. And I also want to thank Houston PetSet for the continued work they do to educate folks in Texas and across the nation when it comes to animal welfare and the overall treatment of our companion animals, specifically here at home in Houston area. Tonight, with the assistance of my special guest, Shelby Bobosky, we're going to discuss something that I think is incredibly important for people to know when it comes to making a difference within the world of becoming an advocate, and also within the world of public affairs, and also just within the world of being active in your own community. Tonight, we're going to cover the do's and don'ts, and I'm going to look to Shelby to cover really all the do's and don'ts on engaging in the public affairs world and learning from a true professional, and also to get a sense of the state of Texas and what's next for animal advocates in Houston. So with that, I'd like to introduce my good friend Shelby Bobosky, who is the executive director of the Texas Humane Legislation Network, THLN. Shelby has served as the executive director for THLN since 2019, and I believe it has a very, very long history and service in the animal welfare community. Also, Shelby is what I like to call a veteran in Austin, meaning she knows the ins and outs of how to operate at the Capitol, but also knows how to advocate at the local level and city hall level. So we're going to cover a lot of that later tonight. So Shelby, would you like to take some time and say hello to our good friends who join us tonight?
Yes, good evening, everybody. And I echo Mark's sentiments. Thank you so much for being here tonight. You know, I'm sure a lot of us have rescue dogs, cats, animals. We rescue animals. We try to get the word out on saving lives of those animals in shelters. But tonight is so important because just with a couple minutes of your time, you can make a true difference for the animals by effectuating change through laws. And it's so important. And Mark, kudos to you for getting my last name right. It is very easy and to screw up. So thank you.
I only practiced 1,000 times throughout the entire day. So just for starters, I know Houston PetSet and THLN, a lot of long history of working together. And so I've always enjoyed working with you on the Capitol for other items as well. But I also like to say that, you know, THLN is always that trusted advocate, that trusted voice when it comes to the Capitol. So thank you so much for joining. And also, before we go any further, and before we go into the questions, a big thanks to Houston PetSet for providing this, you know, nonpartisan, very educational space. It's very rare for organizations to take on this work, especially within the nonprofit world. So thank them so much for you know, making this step to educate the folks within their community. I'm going to ask Shelby some questions, and then later towards the end of the meeting, I would love if our attendees here can go ahead and chat in the chat box. Questions you may have, feel free to send them to me directly. We're going to do our best to answer all the questions, but again, tonight is to really learn about the specifics of how you can make a difference in your community. So enough of me talking. Shelby, my first question is what is THLN? What's your operational purpose? What's going on in your organization day to day?
Well, thank you. So THLN stands for the Texas Humane Legislation Network. And I owe any expertise that I have or that any of our staff have because we have a 45-year history. THLN was founded in 1975 by advocates at the time that saw certain laws were passing that were really bad for animals, and they wanted to do something about it. So it was made entirely by volunteers. And would you believe back in 1975 and in the early days, they would actually do phone trees. So when they found out about a bad law, one person would call from the payphone at the Capitol, and it was old school PTA phone trees that were going on to educate everyone. So, you know, the mission of THLN is to educate advocates and to provide for the humane treatment of animals through legislation and advocacy. And so, you know, for 45 years, we've been going to the Capitol and truly making a mark, whether it was having a hand in the original dogfighting law in Texas, whether it was actual shelter regulations. Before THLN, I will say that the shelters were not really regulated. And so those early shelter regulations and continuation of that, from animal cruelty and so many other laws. In 2011, we helped pass a law to go ahead and really have some regulations with respect to large scale breeding facilities. And one of my favorite bills that I helped pass was in 2013. In the state of Texas, they were still using a gas chamber to euthanize dogs and cats. It's just a terrible death. And so we were able to collect all the data and figure out which shelters were still doing that. And we were able to pass a bill so that any euthanasia after that would be by injection. Because although we want zero animals in shelters to die because they're there through no fault of their own, at least this was a method that was recognized throughout the United States and seen as the most preferred method of euthanasia.
I know y'all take on a lot of work, and it just kind of goes to show that phone trees, worked in 1975. But I think tonight we're going to talk about some things that are a little bit more advanced than good old fashioned phone trees.
Right.
So let's talk about, you mentioned some of THLN's past victories. Are there any, big victories that you've taken on, while you've been at THLN? Any big mountains that y'all tracked together?
Sure. So in 2015, we had another victory that we're incredibly proud of. At that time, unfortunately, there were police officers that were shooting dogs at an alarming rate and, turned into a complete public safety nightmare. And we were hearing from advocates throughout the state. It didn't matter if you were in a rural area or urban. And so we came together through one amazing volunteer, Cindy Bowling, and she's out of the Arlington area, and she really helped us understand what a problem this was. So we were able to pass a bill that required training at the law enforcement level of a street cop, so to speak, that they had to do at least 4 hours of in-class training on how to encounter a dog. So we call it the mandatory canine encounter bill. And we passed it, and we've done some research since then. And the number of police shootings since that has been passed has now dipped down to under 15%.
Wow.
So, and it's really unbelievable because California and advocates from really 3 or 4 states have called us and said, how did you pass that and how can we work with it? But that really goes to show one of the huge, in my opinion, one of the most important things is partnerships, right? And working with other groups. So it was fortunate that we had TMPA and CLEAT, and those are law enforcement associations, along with the help of the sheriffs. We went to them early on, and they don't want to be attacked because of certain decisions. And quite frankly, it was amazing, Mark, UPS, any kind of delivery service, they usually have to go through 2 weeks of training when you enter a house, right? Or when you come up to a house and deliver packages. And law enforcement had zero training at all on how to encounter a dog. And think of how, whether you're serving a summons, whether you're going to a call, 1 in 3 police officers in Texas were encountering dogs, but yet they had no training on it. So really it was a void in education and training that we saw, and we were able to pass it. And the success speaks for itself.
Yeah. So something I learned just in my career when it comes to public policy and advocacy, nothing gets done by a team of one. It takes coalitions to constantly drive the conversation, to constantly move the needle. And sometimes we have good days when we have victories, and sometimes we just don't. So on the flip side of the past victories that THLN has been able to accomplish, what are some of the areas that the coalition overall just came up a little bit short, and how do you work on that? The next session, the next city council meeting. What are some things that THLN is looking forward to doing that we weren't able to accomplish last session or last meeting?
Yeah, so, I would give the example of the 2011 bill to regulate large scale breeder facilities. So it's called the Texas Licensed Breeder Act. And, when we passed it, sometimes you have to, as you go through the legislative process, you have to make compromises. And that can be very difficult because at THLN, we believe in progress over perfection. because we think, if we can just get in there and change the law, possibly the next session or later on, you really can effectuate positive change. That was, and still is frustrating. We hope to go in next session and make real changes there. But, sometimes you have to make compromises. For example, you have to have right now 11 breeding females. That's a lot of dogs.
Yeah.
We would really like to lower that to 5. But we also know, due to the sophisticated and the longstanding history and experience, that we need certain votes, and you got to get to that vote count. And if you don't have it, then your bill is dead. So, sometimes it's that just the waiting and the battles, but you just have to keep going back. We tried in 2007 and 2009 to pass that same bill, and we failed. And within Texas, you have to wait 2 years because the legislature meets every 2 years for 6 months, and thousands of bills are filed and 3 out of 4 fail. So it's just really that patience, but the persistence pays off.
I know for session, this is not, for other city council meetings or county meetings, for session, it's always like a race to the finish, just to ensure that your bill is going through the right processes and making sure that you have a great sponsor. And so it sounds like for these larger legislative pieces, it takes a good 2 to 3 sessions to get it right. But what you just mentioned, I don't think people understand completely, is that 2 or 3 sessions is 6, 9 years. It takes a long time for this to happen. So my next question, I'd like to get a sense from you. What is a bill that you're working on now, or what are some items you're working on now that you're still moving the needle and pushing the ball down the yards?
Right. So our number one piece of legislation that we will pass this year is the Safe Outdoor Dogs legislation. And we have filed a similar bill in 2015, 2017, and 2019. So this is the 4th session that this bill is being put forward. And it is House Bill 873, and the Senate bill was just filed today, and that is 474. And just to get into it a little bit, the reason it's taking so long is because it's such monumental change. We are truly fixing statewide how people treat dogs that are tethered outside. And I'd be happy to go into a little bit of the current law if you'd like.
I love that. I know each time it has to be tailored a little bit more. So what does that look like, and how has that evolved since, I think you said 2011 was the first time this was, 2009 was the first time this was staked up?
Well, so the Safe Outdoor Dogs bill was originally brought in 2015. But yes, it has taken us a while to get to a place where we know, again, going back to the vote count, right? So the current law was passed in 2007. And sometimes when a law is passed through the state legislature, amendments can be put on it, or certain legislators change it. And when it came out, it was rather poorly drafted. And so TACA, the Texas Animal Control Association, started coming to us and saying, please fix this law, because there's so many cities out there that rely on the statewide law, and it's truly unenforceable. And here's why. There is a current warning that is mandatory that is within the law right now. So for example, let's say it's July 1st, your neighbor has a chained dog and the dog has no water. The animal control officer comes out, puts a warning on the door, leaves, and then has to come back 24 hours later. Well, sometimes the owner will go and put water in the bowl, and then 2 days later, there's no water, right? So it's just the warning is the biggest problem within the current law. And in addition, what we're doing is we are adding a definition of shelter, which is so important for animal control officers and law enforcement, because right now, what is adequate shelter? One of our witnesses that testified 2 years ago said, you could have a piece of plywood against a barn and the owner of the dog might think that's adequate shelter. Mm-hmm. Well, in North Texas on a very cold night, that is not going to be enough shelter for that dog. So with this bill, we now define shelter so that the judge, the dog owner, and the law enforcement knows exactly what is allowed as shelter.
So this sounds like just a huge drain on law enforcement resources. If an officer, an animal control officer, has to go out every other day, this is just a huge drain on the resources, isn't it?
It really is. It's just a complete waste. And that's
Mm.
why Texas Animal Control Association came to us and said, pretty please fix this law. And I can tell you that it's really interesting. There are 200 cities in Texas, over 200 cities that have gone out, and some have used our tethering toolkit, which is on our website, and they've changed their current tethering ordinance in their city, right? But there are 1,100 cities in
Yeah.
Texas. And so we want to effectuate change for the entire state. I have a animal control officer in a very rural area, and he calls me like once a year and says, please, pass this law. How can I help? I said, well, I'd be happy to give you the tethering toolkit. And he said, well, one of the city council members chains the dog in front of the house.
Oh,
So
man.
we'll never be able to pass that ordinance. And so that's why this statewide law is so important.
Wow. And I feel that this would be a game changer just across the state of Texas when it comes to how people treat their companion animal.
That's right.
And I think it just takes some work to continue moving it in a position where it's going to pass. If I understand correctly, I know it in when's the last time we worked together, Shelby? 2019. It's been 2 years already. Yeah. I know it passed the Senate, but it got stuck in the House, and I think it died. This bill, unfortunately, died last minute at midnight, and it was just heartbreaking to see. But I'm really glad that THLN is, picking it up and running with it again. And that kind of leads me to our next question, and really to get to the advocacy part of what organizations can do. What can, a nonprofit or a person that is interested, what can they see? What can they do to support, what you're doing, at the local level, but also at the Capitol?
That's a great question. So let's start with the Capitol. So if there is an animal welfare bill out there that they're interested in, as you know, thousands of people throughout the state want this bill to pass, right? So they can go ahead and they can right now call their state representative or their state senator. And the easiest way to do that is you literally Google who represents me, Texas, and the Texas website comes in, you put in your address, and it will tell you your state rep and your state senator. I promise you, it is as easy as ordering pizza, if not easier, right? Because it's a 2-minute call. You call them up and you say, hi, is there someone there that I can talk to? Let's say it's the state rep about House Bill 873. And then the Senate bill, SB, S for Senate, is if you call the senator, can I talk to someone about Senate Bill 474? So then they say yes. And you say, I just want you to know I'm a constituent. I support this bill. And then usually it's unbelievable, Mark. Everybody has a story about a chained dog, right? Whether it's that dog that you pass on the way to work every day and you feel terrible because the dog's been out there, it's lonely, it's cold, doesn't have food or water.
And then my wife makes me pull over and pull the dog in the car, and then I'm fostering a dog for 2 weeks. Yeah, I know that drill. Yeah.
Uh-oh, sounds like you have some personal experience there, but it's so true. It doesn't matter if you're an animal shelter employee, if you're a rescuer, if you're a police officer. And again, if you're just someone that witnesses chained dogs or you see it, you have an affinity towards it. And so, legislators want to hear from their constituents. If you are a rescuer and you volunteer hundreds of hours a year, they want to hear from you because you're a rock star hero and they need to know that people in their district care about this. So you ask them to support it. Sometimes it's a little bit of a longer call. They might ask you some more questions. If you don't know the answers, no big deal. Say, I can get back to you. We have fact sheets on our website, and they're very paint by numbers because in the past, legislators sometimes got confused about this bill, rightfully so, because we're doing a lot with it. But at the end of the day, you just call and ask them to support the bill. And really, that's it. If you sign up for our action alerts, we'll tell you kind of the important times to call. But that's really it. If you'd like to write a letter, that's just as important. Obviously, if there was a pyramid here, the top of the pyramid would be a visit to the Capitol, right?
Yeah.
Or a visit to the state office. But unfortunately, due to COVID, everything right now, all those are pretty much off the table. You can set up a Zoom call, talk about it more, but it's really that easy on a statewide level. At the local level, it's really understanding what the issues are. A lot of towns have shelter commissioners, and they are kind of the advocate or the intermediary between the city council person and issues in your area. So I'm in Dallas, and we were having kind of a coyote issue, and there were some people that were doing things that weren't legal. And so I found out about it and talked to my city council member. Really, the first step is just getting to know your city council member and talking to them about the issues. There are usually groups in all the different cities, but it's really easy to get involved. And again, you're the voice that the animals don't have.
So you mentioned something that, you call the office and they may want to ask more questions. And I think for some folks, that's a daunting task, cold calling someone that they never talked to before. And I know some folks get really nervous when it comes to, advocating or putting yourself out there to fight for something. But I want to make sure people know that's a good thing when they ask you questions. It's a good thing to say, let me get back to you, because the one thing I learned in my career is that if I don't know the answer for something, I'm not going to try to solve that problem or give them an answer I don't know. I'm going to let them know honestly, hey, I don't know the answer. Give me, 8 hours, give me 12 hours. I'm going to circle back and find that answer for you. So that's always a good thing. Let me also ask you, I heard that
Mark,
if you call
really quick, if I could, just a quick story. So I used to try cases. I was a trial attorney. I worked on big cases, small cases. The first time I got involved with THLN and I called my representative, his name is Eric Johnson. He's now the mayor. I hung up. I got so nervous, and I'm a trial attorney, and I was like, what is wrong with me? Like, so I completely get it. But I will say this, when you hang up the phone, I have people call me and email me. Some are crying, some just feel so good, because you feel so good to be part of that process, right? It's so incredibly important, because less than 3% of the people, now I'd like to say that is before the 2016 election, but at that time, less than 3% of the people were getting involved in their politics, if it was local or statewide. That's crazy, right? So they don't hear from many people. And also, if your state representative or senator and they have a good animal record, thank them. Thank them. They're getting yelled at constantly from various issues throughout the state. But thank you so much for supporting regulations relating to puppy mills. They appreciate it so much.
Yeah, I think it also applies, city council or our local commission, just giving them a call and saying, thank you so much for your support on that. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
What I wanted to ask you is I always heard a rumor that, the intern or whoever's at the office has to write down your name and number and tack down that you called about X issue. And then that is then reported to, elected official. Can you confirm that? Is there someone actually taking down every call and showing, we had this many calls to say yes, this many calls to say no?
Yes. Now that is good practice, and they should be. And so, yes, that actually happens, and they do care. Now, some legislators actually do counts. Like, for example, we might go back to them and they'll say, listen, I have a ton of people that are calling me that's saying that tethering their dog or chaining their dog is their way of life. And so we need, that's a signal to us to get more calls into that office, but absolutely. And that's why, a personal call is so important versus sometimes a petition. Our petitions we've done too, and we only ask and we make sure that they're just Texans. And then we can show certain legislators, you have 700 people in your district that support this bill, and we have the backup. But, sometimes those change.org petitions, when you have someone calling in from Australia or whatnot, they're just not taken seriously. They're put on the back shelf. So a call, a personal story, an email, those are so incredibly important, and they'll remember it.
So I'm really happy you brought that up, because something I was having a conversation with a colleague of mine was the difference when it comes to people that live in the city council district or live in their district versus these large international groups who I think always have great intentions, but what the elected officials see is that, well, what they see is 100 calls coming in from another state, another country, and that just kind of inflates part of the conversation. Can you talk about the differences, like the meaningful differences elected officials will see if it's someone nationally calling or someone lives down the street? calling. Can you talk about the differences?
Absolutely. Number one, if you are not a constituent, for example, let's micro this, right? So if you're not a constituent, you don't vote for them. So, sometimes that doesn't matter as much. If you're in the state of Texas, they're going to listen to you more. But if you're outside the state, it's really an unknown rule in Texas. Texas legislators really don't care that much. I learned my lesson, I think it was back in 2011, and I was so excited. I was talking to one of the legislators. I said, well, New York just passed this. And he's like, literally looked at me and he said, I don't really care. And it was great. I got a hard knocks lesson there. But the point is that, if you are from the state and you are calling from the state and you can vote for that person, they listen to you, and they care what you have to say. Some of the best stories I've heard from people after I've talked to them about being an advocate is I had a rescuer that had never been involved in this process at all. And she called up and talked to one of the staffers, which also brings up a good point. You rarely talk to the legislator themselves. You're always talking to the staffers. Please be polite to them. It is so important that you're polite. And, their opinion of you and what you're trying to advocate for is incredibly important, because they're going to say to their boss, oh, this advocate, she volunteers at the local shelter. She's seen embedded collars. We should listen to her, versus, yeah, this woman called, man, she was hot under the collar. She was yelling. She was saying that I pay for your salary. You're not going to go anywhere, right? But this one rescuer said that she somewhat befriended the staff member after going to a THLN event. And the staffer came out and she did a tour where they went down an alley and saw literally 50 houses just with chain dogs. And that is how that staffer got her elected, her state representative, to be a co-sponsor on the bill, because they had no idea that they had that many chain dogs in their district. So again, these calls are just so important versus, the national, just the robocall, so to speak.
Yeah. When you talk about staffers, I mean, that's incredibly important, because it's important to build relationships, no matter where they are, if they're elected or not, because you never know. A staffer might be the next elected official from that district,
Right.
5-10 years later. Just a fun anecdote. I remember going to the Capitol, I think during the 85th or 86th legislative session, and I was working with a few organizations, and I was so excited to go up there and to meet with representatives and say, this is what we're trying to do here. But 3 out of those 5 meetings, I didn't get to sit down with representative. I sat down with staff, and it was kind of frustrating, because you trek 2-3 hours out of Austin, you pay for the $8 an hour parking, you go through security, you go through the maze of the Capitol, try to find the representative. But we briefed that staffer, and then a day later, you get a call from the official saying, hey, thank you so much for coming in and talking to Pete. Pete, let me know X, Y, and Z. I want to talk to you about it. I mean, it's because of those, not overlooking that staffer, not being annoyed or upset that they're not meeting with you. Those are the relationships I think are highly valuable in this line of advocacy, this line of work.
Yeah, hands down. And I know you're frustrated, but it's funny, also have patience with them. Sometimes these staffers, they still might be in college or just out of college. And what happens is they are literally thrown 7,000 bills. And so our bill is just one of them. So, you really, if, like you said, it was frustrating, but you took the time and educated them, they're going to remember your bill. And again, just like you said, the legislator will hopefully support it.
So something I want to talk about, that's a very helpful tactic strategy to go in there and to make a great impression no matter who you're talking to. I want to talk about some of the unhelpful strategies, something that I've had to learn the hard way. What are some do's and don'ts when you're meeting with either the elected official or meeting with their staff?
Okay, so let's go with the do's first. So do be polite. Also always do a tiny bit of research in terms of their history on voting for animals. On our website, THLN.org, we have all of their voting records since 2011. And if they have a 100% scorecard, thank them. Thank them. My gosh, thank you so much for voting for animals. Do understand that they're human just like you, and they're probably pet owners. When you go in, I'm sure, Mark, if it was an animal related issue, the first thing the staffer says is, oh my gosh, I love my dog, or I love my cat.
Yeah.
It really eases any kind of nerves you have, because they're just like us, and it's not that daunting or scary. Talk to them about the bill, tell them why it's important. And at the very end, make the ask for the support. So do ask, can we have Representative Smith's support on this bill? And then always follow up with a thank you, a handwritten thank you. I cannot tell you how important handwritten thank yous are after a meeting. So those are the do's. Don'ts. Okay. And by the way, I'm totally guilty of some of these as well. So I will put that out there. I would just say, don't be rude. Just, the opposite of polite. Please be respectful. Even if the staffer might not be respectful, please be respectful to them. Do be respectful of their time as well. Again, 7,000 bills. You don't have, an hour to sit and chit chat and talk about the bill. Get your point across and understand that. And, again, just that whole level of just being respectful, being polite, asking them to support the bill. If you have the fact sheets and you've made this appointment on the phone, you can read the fact sheets and some of the information. But when you're in front of them, just try to know some of the information. As you said earlier, please don't guess an answer or lie. Just tell them, I'm going to get back to you on that. And, that should be a pretty successful meeting. There's only been a couple of times where, I got a call where someone went in and they pretty much did all of those things. And, that actually can hurt a bill or an idea, or, let's say you want to ban tethering in your city and that's how you act. That's going to be really hard, and you're going to be putting up a wall, and you won't be able to really go far with your bill.
So let's take a step back. You're in the room, you're talking to the staff or legislator, but how do you do that? How do you ask for that meeting? I know with COVID, we're going to be doing a lot of Zooms and phone calls, but how should that, initial first date look like? Do you send an email? Do you call their staff? What does that look like?
Great question. Again, once you go to that Who Represents Me, you pull up your legislator's name, you click on it, and they usually have two numbers. They have a district office, and then they have an Austin office. So call them up and you say, I would like to meet with, I would like to Zoom with either the representative or the staffer that works on House Bill 873. And then they'll get you that information. And usually you talk to a staffer first, and then you set up a call. And it's really, again, it's just kind of like setting up a dentist appointment. It's not intimidating. You're just setting up that appointment. So you can ask for the scheduler or the staffer that is working on the bill number, and you give them the bill number. Yeah.
Thank you, Shelby. I also I'm not sure if you can hear me, my headphones are being a little wonky. I also want to talk about something that now they're in this digital realm, social media. I know a lot of things can be done via social media. You can send a kudos, a thank you. You can even do a webinar and an invite and say, please come on down and listen to what we have to say. I think those are helpful ways to work on things and move the needles. But I think there are also a lot of folks that get just super passionate, and they can sometimes lose sight of what the overall objective is. Do you have any do's and don'ts or some practical rules when it comes to advocating through social media? Anything you can tell us?
Excellent question. So the do's are: follow your state representative or senator on Facebook or Twitter. And if they say something, for example, about a bill that's not even related to animals, you should like it, right? Go ahead and thank them or like it, or find common areas that you would agree with your state representative or senator. I would say, the comments is not the time to get into arguments with other people or anything, unless there is information in there that is not accurate. So I'll give you an example, Mark. I've had people where I've put something on my Facebook page or I shared it, and someone will pop up and say, well, I think this is ridiculous. I think that you should be able to tether a dog, and this is saying you can't tether dogs. So I will get on there and say, that's not true. Actually, you can tether a dog as long as you follow these rules provided in the bill. So if you need to get on and fix an inaccurate statement, I think that's great. But the fighting and the comments, just again, we try to keep it civil, because I promise you, I personally made that mistake when one of our bills died. And legislators do not forget. They just don't forget. And so I just always, or elected officials, a city council member, they will remember. And so we just ask them to be kind and courteous and call them up and have a conversation. Ask them for coffee. Why did you vote against that bill? Let's have a conversation. I don't think the place is for Facebook.
Yeah, I want to take the time right now and just encourage our panelists, our attendees to feel free to submit any questions. There's a chat option in the bottom bar of your desktop. Feel free to click on that, type in your question, and we're going to do our best to make through all the questions. Shelby, I do want to go back for a second. There's something that I think is obvious that I didn't ask. What are the items, the helpful materials that you take in when you meet with the legislator? I know myself, when I go meet with the legislator, I take in, a one-pager to things that I want to do, my own personal notes, like a Lucky Charm, and then, I kind of go through each item. What are some things you take in? Do you recommend leaving things behind? How does that process look like?
So that's a great question. It's so funny. My 9-year-old gave me a turtle back when he was 5, when we started trying to fix this bill. And so I always keep that in my pocket. So I love hearing that you do that too. So what would you take into a meeting? I would definitely take in the fact sheets, and I would leave them behind with the staffer that you meet. Or if you're on a Zoom, after this call, I'd be happy to email these to you. And that's pretty much what's going to happen this session. In the Zoom call, if you have ever taken a heavy dog off a chain, or you do it quite often and you have an example of a chain, particularly on the Safe Outdoor Dogs bill, I think that is one of the best things you can do, is to show, the elected official or their staff member, this is legal in Texas. And you hold it up and you show them, because I know that just personal meetings with some legislators, that is a reason for them to co-sponsor the bill. And so any stories you have, if you have a picture of an embedded collar that isn't too, I just have to say gross, I would bring that or show that. But all of us have stories about a tethered dog, like we were discussing before. And again, those personal stories really help get the legislator, and it puts them in your shoes, and you're showing empathy and why this bill is so important. I will tell you, it's interesting, because the past 2 sessions, we really took a different approach than this session. We are calling it the Safe Outdoor Dogs bill, because the dog is safe and the humans are safe. And like you said, this has really turned into a law enforcement animal control issue, because we know that, why is persistent tethering bad? Well, it's dangerous for people. On our website, we have a list of all the different horrendous maulings and dog bites from chained dogs that are just stuck there and they can't move, and children come into their circumference. There's so many organizations that are against, continued tethering: USDA, AVMA, CDC. And would you believe that the American Kennel Club actually has a statement on this? And they say dogs should never be tethered in a manner that could cause harm to them or others. So, if you want to bring in facts other than the fact sheets, we have some great resources that are located on our website.
So this also applies, though, not just to when we focus on state legislation, but also the local level. I know here at the City of Houston, every Wednesday, you can go up to City Council and list your grievances and your concerns. But even in that step, I think people, I don't want to say lack confidence, but people are, there's a fear there to going up and doing that. Do you have any wise words of encouragement, or any? I know you told your story earlier, calling now the mayor of Dallas, but do you have any words of encouragement for folks that are just kind of iffy on, not only who to call, but how to make that call?
Right. So I always tell people to write out their testimony and practice it. And I love what you said about city council meetings. Let's say, excuse me, in a city that there is a loose, dogs are becoming loose and they're ending up in the shelter. And let's say a group of advocates come together and say, I think what would be great is if we passed a mandatory microchip ordinance, right? Where every citizen has to microchip their dogs. And going to city council and starting just being present with them, like you said, every week, and you write down a statement and you send a different person from your advocacy group once a week, they're going to start listening, and then they're going to call you and say, I really liked what you said, help me. Also, to get started, just again, in those meetings, please be polite, be courteous of the time. When your time is up, your time is up. Even if you haven't finished, you just say, thank you so much, and you move on. But writing that down and practicing those 3 minutes can be incredibly important and effective. But again, consistency, like you said, going back and going back. One other thing that's always important as well is, city council members, legislators, people always are dumping on them problems, right? But it's rare that someone gives you a solution. They just say, this is a huge problem, and leave. Well, for example, on the mandatory microchipping, there are organizations out there that will give out free scanners. So let's say it's a budget issue. Let's say animal shelter manager or someone says, we can't afford that. You say, I have a solution. I've gone to these 3 organizations and they'll provide scanners, and then you're helping them. Help them help us, right? And it always seems that is taken more seriously because you're part of the solution.
I think something to note is that you and me, we are in this world, we know these issues, and we have our own ideas and solutions of what should be done. But I think a lot of organizations also have their ideas of what should be done. And it's not a competition of best ideas, it's just different philosophies on how to get to the end goal. I want to just let people know that it can sometimes be, how do I say this? Not to always be frustrated when you're laying out a new issue to an elected official and they not have all the answers to it or the background, because that's just, we live in this world, and so we shouldn't be frustrated when we're trying to explain someone else and they're not catching it so quickly.
Right.
So I promise that to lead into this next question, and then we'll do our best to get into a lot of these audience questions.
Sure.
Something very, very basic and something we should have covered, I think, at the top, but making those calls and writing those letters, how should they be structured? What are the asks in there? I remember my 4th grade teacher saying you have an intro, a body, and conclusion. So what do those letters look like? And how do you feel it fits an ask in there?
So let me give you, I need a specific example that I think will really help. Okay. So let's say that there's some serious animal cruelty cases that are happening in your area. Okay. Happening in your city, your county, and the district attorney is not taking them seriously. You find out that no charges were filed against someone, or, the defendant was no billed, which means, the case is thrown out. And you have a district attorney that does not listen or care about animal crimes. Then what I would suggest is getting with some other rescue organizations and coming together again as a coalition, right? And deciding what do we need? What is the ask? So like you said, the intro, what is the ask? The ask is to take animal cruelty seriously. Okay, how do we go about doing that? Let's show this district attorney statistics, right? Statistics that if you have a safe community, then your people are safe. Let's talk to him about the link between animal abuse and interpersonal violence. So, hey, this rescue, why don't you guys write a letter on your letterhead that talks about the link? And how about this rescue? Why don't you guys talk about the fact that the FBI now is tracking serious animal cruelty crimes? And then let's sit down and schedule a meeting with the district attorney's office and say, help us understand why you didn't try these crimes, right? And then it becomes a really effective and efficient way to try to find out why your district attorney isn't taking on these cases. Now, sometimes you find out that they were really bad cases. Animal cruelty cases are incredibly difficult to try. But Mark, sometimes I have seen people put up billboards that say district attorney or county attorney, do your job. And they show, a starving dog. And, that has been effective in some areas. So, it's really kind of, what is the problem? What are we trying to get at? And what is the solution? And I truly believe it's we, not me. If the rescues and the communities could come together in the animal world, we would be stronger than the Realtor Association or some of the other associations that are so strong. But, if you can find common ground on an issue in your area, whether it's mandatory microchipping, whether it's taking animal cruelty seriously, then it's, the sky's the limit. And you do it in that efficient way.
I know Houston PetSet has been leading when it comes to coalitions to make these changes. I know they've created organizations that look specifically at law enforcement. They've assisted, they've funded organizations in law enforcement. And I know that they've always kind of led on this. I only have 2 more questions left. I just want to say my last ones at the very end because I have, moderator privileges I can ask at the very end. I'm going to ask one last question I have, and then I know our good friend Ron has a question that he'd like to answer. But my second last question is, how do you know if you're successful? How do you know if you're measuring success in a way that actually looks successful? I know we push a lot and we talk a lot about the bigger issues, but how do you know if you're moving the needle in the right direction?
So through the statewide advocacy, it's really simple. Did you pass your bill, right? And then after the bill is passed, have you notified everybody that relates to that bill, that the law's changed, right? So pass a bill, notify people, and then collect data if you can. And then 2 years later, look at it. Like I said, when we passed the mandatory canine encounter bill, we waited 5 years and then collected that data. But also when we passed the cruelty law and strengthened that law, we actually sent a letter to every single district attorney and county attorney. District county is 257, district is way more, but we told them, look at this law that passed. And I had a district attorney in East Texas, and he called and thanked me and said, this letter is everything I would have never known, because we usually know about, the other laws, but not relating to animals. So, that's how you can measure success. And then the phone calls and getting out there and talking to people. Obviously, data collection is so important and it's great, but sometimes it's just having conversations, with a sheriff in a small town, my guys were all making fun of me, and they were mad that they had to go to that mandatory canine encounter training, and they actually loved it and they learned something. And now they carry dog biscuits in their squad car. It's as simple as that.
Yeah. So I want to get to the audience questions. I know we have one from Ron, who is the publisher of Wagging Tail's dog rescue magazine. He wants to know what would be the best way for his magazine to help in having, I'm assuming, the tethering bill pass. What can Ron do?
Yay, thank you, Ron, and thank you for attending. So the best way is to possibly interview Stacy Sutton Kirby with Texas Humane Legislation Network. She is our amazing Director of Government Relations, but truly taking our fact sheets and publishing them and letting your readers know that this bill exists. And again, we're talking about a 2-minute phone call or an email with a personal story attached. That would be unbelievable. I have to say, and Mark, I know you know this too, people are so turned off by politics. It's boring, it's confusing, it's frustrating when people are like, what is the problem with this bill? It's common sense legislation. Doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican, you want to help dogs outside, give them shelter, give them water. And it can be very frustrating, but I promise you, making this call and doing this small action is one of the most important things you can do if you love animals. Yeah.
So I think that's one of the questions we have from the audience. I want to also get another perspective on the city level. What are some cities that you would say are leading in this area? Why are they leading in this area? Is it because they have a great coalition? Is it because they have great city council members? I know you said that, you're in Dallas, and I think Dallas has a codified language when it comes to tethering. What were some of the movements that were made in order to make sure Dallas has that language in their ordinance?
Oh man, you're calling me out and asking me to talk about my favorites. Well, I will get to Dallas. I will tell you that I am always impressed with San Antonio. I think San Antonio is doing a phenomenal job with their shelter. Their ordinances are incredibly progressive, in my opinion. And I really am impressed with the fact that they have, I think it's 9 certified animal cruelty ACOs. And Shannon Sims leads the charge down there, and they've just done a phenomenal job. And so, sometimes people ask me, well, point me to some ordinances that are great. I would say San Antonio. In terms of a shelter in Plano, Jamie Cantrell is the shelter manager, and man, he writes a good ordinance. So I always have, but again, Texas is not one size fits all, right? So what works in Plano with, soccer moms, might not work in East Texas or West Texas in a rural town. We're all different. But, really going out there and looking at ordinances, I can tell you, you need to update your animal ordinances. The first thing you should do is look at your shelter and say, when was the last time we updated our ordinances? Because I have found so many towns that say, I can't believe you're relying on the statewide tethering law, right? You're a huge city, or, you're an urban area. You should have banned tethering or, severely limited it. City of Dallas is doing, in my opinion, a fantastic job. Ed Jamison and his team are over Dallas Animal Services, and they have a great synergy and connection with the 2 large shelters, SPCA of Texas, phenomenal organization, Operation Kindness. I think they meet once a week, and they have some great corporate partnerships as well. And they truly believe in updating their ordinances and making them progressive. A lot of cities are doing the best they can with the resources they have. But if you're looking to make meaningful change in your area, in your city, the first thing you should do is always go to your ordinances and look at them. Again, what's the problem in the city? Loose owned dogs, mandatory microchipping, right? What's the problem in this one area? Dogs that are dying on chains. Ooh, we got to fix the tethering ordinance. So it just, again, every city is different, but I think it's so important to look at your ordinances and make sure that your city council members are aware of animal issues in your cities.
Thank you for that. I'm embarrassed to say, but I'm also proud that I know, for the people attending and watching, you can find animal and fowl, regulation language in Chapter 6 of the City of Houston Ordinance Code. I don't know why I know that. I feel, really embarrassed that a nerd like me knows that. So we don't have much time left. We have 5 minutes left. I think we're all out of audience questions. And Shelby, I don't mean to pop quiz you, but I want to know, before we jump off here, 1, 2, 3, what are the, ranking first place, second place, third place things that a person can do to be effective, not only in the Capitol, but also at their local level? What are those top items?
So the first and foremost is be polite and kind when emailing and responding and talking to elected officials. I just think that is so important. We deal with so many spirited animal advocates, and believe me, I have a lot of anger when I see an animal being treated terribly, but that's not going to get me anywhere with someone that is in charge of changing the laws. I can't go down to Austin and vote for the tethering bill. My representative can. And so just again, that be polite, kind, and respectful. That's number 1. Number 2, be prepared. It's not that much, right? It's just knowing the bill number, just knowing that we're trying to make things better for dogs that live outdoors. And shouldn't we give them shelter? Isn't that, common sense? So be prepared. And then also always with the thank you, the handwritten thank you, always thanking them. If they're on Facebook and they do something great for animals, thank them, right? but trying to keep off social media in a negative light. I'll be honest, it just doesn't go anywhere. Where are you getting with that? Unless again, it's to fix some sort of narrative that is false and negative. But, I have to say, Mark, in closing, I see so many people spinning their wheels, and, if you follow those things, you can be an effective advocate. And sometimes some of the best things that are done for animals are done behind the scenes because you weren't shouting on Facebook and because you weren't so vociferous, right? It happened because you were polite, kind, you knew your facts, and you told your story.
Do you have a final ask for the attendees that are watching?
Yes. Please support the safe outdoor dogs bills that we've talked about tonight. No, truly, you all can make such a difference. And again, just remember, it's a 2-minute phone call. If you want to go deep, you can, but that phone call is the most important thing that you can do for animals in 2021. We have to change this ineffective law. And I promise you, we will be the first in the United States to ban chains altogether. And it will be a very exciting day.
I'm looking forward to that day. I want to thank you for spending time with us today. I know you have a busy schedule, especially during legislative session. I can't imagine what your calendar looks like. I also want to thank the attendees who jumped on and watched today. I hope you learned something. I know I learned something. And I also want to thank Houston PetSet for, again, providing this educational space. I know Houston PetSet has 6 components of the work, 6 pillars, and 2 of them or one of them is advocacy and the other one is education. So I'm glad that they can put these together to allow us the opportunity to talk to some folks in our network and teach them a couple things. So Shelby, thank you so much. Thank you to all the attendees. Thank you for Renee, Stephanie, and Ron for jumping on. We really appreciate it. Shelby, thank you so much. And I'll see you probably later in the week around the Capitol, whenever we get back to the building, whenever we're let in back in the building.
Yeah, right. Thank you so much, Mark. And again, just a quick thank you to Houston PetSet giving us this space. And thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you, everyone. Y'all have a great night.